The greatest threats rarely announce themselves. They arrive smiling, applauding, and waiting for everyone else to look the wrong way. Crystal Moon Palace had welcomed thousands of honored guests before, but never had its magnificent halls carried such an uneasy silence beneath the music. Towering crystal chandeliers bathed the marble ballroom in warm golden light, while enormous stained-glass windows allowed the silver glow of a full moon to spill across polished floors. Noble families from every corner of the Northern Territories gathered beneath banners embroidered with the silver wolf crest, celebrating another peaceful year under the rule of Alpha King Ethan Blackwood. Laughter echoed from every elegant table. Crystal glasses chimed together in cheerful toasts. Musicians performed graceful melodies that drifted through the palace like a gentle breeze. To almost everyone present, it appeared to be the perfect evening. Only one person felt something was terribly wrong. Olivia Hayes quietly carried a polished silver tray between crowded banquet tables, careful not to interrupt conversations that barely acknowledged her existence. At 23 years old, she had spent nearly her entire adult life serving inside Crystal Moon Palace as an Omega waitress. Her gray uniform blended into the background of every royal celebration, and the neatly tied white apron around her waist had become almost invisible to the nobles who accepted her quiet service without a second thought. Long blonde hair rested neatly behind her shoulders, and a simple crescent moon pendant shimmered softly against her uniform whenever candlelight reached it. Her blue eyes, however, were never still. They moved gently from face to face, from doorway to balcony, from servant to guest, collecting details without anyone realizing they were being observed. Her grandmother had always smiled whenever Olivia asked why she insisted on teaching strange lessons instead of ordinary household skills. Watch before you speak. Listen before you move. Every room tells a story long before anyone opens their mouth. Olivia never fully understood those words as a child. Tonight they echoed inside her mind with unusual clarity. At the center of the ballroom, Alpha King Ethan Blackwood greeted distinguished guests with the same calm dignity that had earned him the loyalty of the entire kingdom. Standing over 6 feet tall in an elegant black royal suit decorated with the silver wolf crest, he carried authority without arrogance. He thanked elderly advisors before greeting decorated commanders. He welcomed wealthy nobles with the same respect he offered young palace attendants carrying trays of food. Every servant who passed near him received a polite nod instead of being ignored. That simple habit had quietly earned Ethan the admiration of those who worked inside the palace every day. Olivia noticed it every time. It reminded her that true greatness never demanded attention. It simply existed. She approached another table carrying crystal glasses when something caught her attention. A noble seated near the eastern wall lightly tapped 2 fingers against the edge of his wine glass. The movement lasted less than a second. Across the ballroom, another noble responded by adjusting his silver cufflink. Neither gesture appeared unusual by itself. Together they felt strangely deliberate. Olivia slowed her pace without stopping. She continued serving drinks while quietly observing both men from the corner of her eye. A few moments later, a third noble folded his linen napkin with careful precision before placing it exactly 3 inches from his plate. The first noble smiled almost imperceptibly. Olivia's heartbeat became slightly heavier. Coincidences happened. Patterns did not. She continued moving naturally through the banquet, never allowing her growing concern to appear on her face. Another servant passed beside her carrying a tray filled with roasted pheasant and fresh bread. Olivia recognized nearly every palace employee by name after years of working beside them. Yet the young man walking toward the royal platform looked unfamiliar. His uniform matched the others perfectly, but something about the way he carried himself felt different. Palace servants learned to move quietly, avoiding unnecessary attention. This man walked with measured confidence, scanning the ballroom. Far too often for someone performing ordinary duties. Olivia watched him pause for a fraction of a second before looking directly toward Alpha King Ethan Blackwood. At that exact moment, the 5 nobles she had been observing all shifted their attention toward the same place. No words were exchanged. No obvious signals appeared. Yet 6 strangers had somehow focused upon one man at precisely the same instant. Olivia tightened her grip upon the silver tray without making a sound. The music continued. Guests laughed. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath the chandeliers. No one else seemed to notice that an invisible thread had quietly connected 6 people across the ballroom. Her grandmother's voice returned once more inside her memory. When enough small pieces point toward the same answer, trust what your eyes have already discovered. Olivia slowly turned toward the royal platform again. Somewhere beneath the beauty of Crystal Moon Palace, behind elegant smiles and perfect manners, something had already begun, and she suddenly realized she might be the only person who could see it before it was too late. Olivia Hayes lowered another crystal glass onto a polished silver tray without allowing the slightest tremor to reach her hands. Around her, the celebration continued exactly as it had only moments before. Noble families laughed over old memories. Musicians filled the ballroom with graceful melodies. Palace servants moved through the sea of guests with practiced precision, balancing elegant platters of roasted meats, fresh fruit, and warm bread. Nothing appeared unusual to anyone else. Yet Olivia could no longer see the banquet the way everyone around her did. Every movement had become another piece of an invisible puzzle. She walked naturally toward the western side of the ballroom, pretending to refill empty glasses while quietly watching the 5 nobles she had noticed earlier. One accepted wine without drinking it. Another adjusted the sleeve of his embroidered coat exactly twice before placing both hands behind his back. A third briefly glanced toward the enormous clock mounted above the northern entrance. None of the gestures meant anything by themselves. Together, they formed a rhythm too deliberate to ignore. Olivia remembered another lesson from her grandmother. People reveal their intentions long before they reveal their actions. They believe others only hear words, but careful eyes always hear movement. She had never forgotten those strange lessons, even if she never fully understood why they mattered. Tonight, they seemed less like childhood memories and more like instructions left behind for this exact moment. She carefully shifted her position beside a marble column where the reflection from a polished decorative shield allowed her to observe nearly half the ballroom without appearing to stare. The unfamiliar servant continued walking steadily through the guests. His tray remained almost untouched. Every experienced palace servant knew that during the busiest moments of a royal banquet, trays became lighter with every step. His remained nearly full because he rarely stopped for anyone. Instead, he seemed far more interested in measuring the distance between himself and the royal platform. Olivia quietly frowned. Something else bothered her. Palace servants naturally adjusted their pace whenever guests crossed their path. This man never changed speed. Guests moved around him instead, almost as though he expected the room to create space for him. Confidence was not unusual. Predictable confidence inside an unfamiliar servant was. Alpha King Ethan Blackwood remained engaged in conversation with respected clan leaders near the center of the ballroom. Olivia noticed him thanking an elderly servant who accidentally brushed against his sleeve while collecting empty dishes. The older man immediately apologized, but Ethan simply smiled and wished him a pleasant evening. Olivia felt the smallest sense of relief. Even surrounded by royalty, Ethan never forgot the people who quietly supported the palace every day. It made the growing unease inside her even harder to ignore. Someone willing to target a man like him would likely choose a moment when everyone believed nothing could possibly happen. She continued serving drinks while drawing slightly closer to the royal platform. As she approached another table, she noticed one of the 5 nobles gently rotate his drinking glass exactly 1/4 of a turn before folding his hands together. Across the ballroom, another noble immediately mirrored the same movement using his own glass. Olivia's breathing slowed. The pattern had repeated again. Silent communication, deliberate timing, careful coordination. She lowered her eyes before anyone noticed she had been watching. The unfamiliar servant reached a side corridor leading toward the kitchens, disappearing from view for only a few seconds. Olivia instinctively counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When he returned, one detail immediately caught her attention. A fresh white serving towel now hung over his left arm. Moments earlier it had rested over his right. Experienced palace workers rarely switched sides because years of routine made every movement automatic. Tiny habits often revealed more truth than grand speeches. Olivia quietly altered her own path until she passed another longtime palace waitress named Clara. Without drawing attention, she whispered, "Do you know the new servant near the eastern tables?" Clara briefly glanced across the ballroom before shaking her head. "I thought he arrived with your section." Olivia forced a polite smile and continued walking before anyone noticed the exchange. Her concern deepened. Every servant assigned to tonight's banquet had trained together for weeks. A stranger should not have been here. She approached the refreshment station near the royal platform and carefully placed her empty glasses upon a polished oak counter. From there, she gained an even clearer view of the ballroom. The five nobles had gradually positioned themselves in different directions surrounding Alpha King Ethan Blackwood without appearing connected. The unfamiliar servant had also drifted closer, stopping briefly whenever another guest blocked his path, before continuing forward with remarkable patience. Olivia no longer believed she was witnessing coincidence. She was watching preparation. Her grandmother had often said that danger preferred patience over speed because patient people rarely attracted attention. Olivia slowly lifted another silver tray and took a steady breath. She possessed no title, no authority, and certainly no reason anyone would believe her if she suddenly interrupted the kingdom's grandest celebration. Yet every instinct she possessed warned her that the next few minutes might determine far more than the outcome of a banquet. Quietly, without drawing a single curious glance, the invisible Omega waitress began moving toward the Alpha King, determined to stay close enough to act if the invisible pattern she alone could see finally revealed its true purpose. Olivia Hayes kept her pace steady as she moved closer to the royal platform, allowing every step to appear as ordinary as the countless others she had taken during years of serving at Crystal Moon Palace. Her silver tray rested comfortably in her hands while her attention quietly gathered every detail surrounding the grand ballroom. The unfamiliar servant had disappeared once again, this time through a narrow service corridor beside the musicians. Olivia continued forward without following him directly. Her grandmother had always warned that chasing uncertainty often caused people to miss the truth waiting somewhere else. Instead, Olivia watched the reactions of everyone around him. A veteran palace cook briefly stepped out of the corridor carrying a basket of warm bread. He paused, frowned for a moment as if searching for someone, then quietly returned inside. Seconds later, another palace attendant emerged alone, looking mildly confused before resuming his duties. The unfamiliar servant did not reappear. Something inside Olivia urged her to investigate. She carefully placed her tray upon a nearby refreshment table before slipping into the service corridor as naturally as though she had simply been assigned another task. The sounds of music and cheerful conversation faded behind thick stone walls. Shelves filled with polished dishes lined one side of the narrow hallway, while fresh linens waited neatly folded upon wooden carts. Everything appeared exactly as it should have been. Then Olivia noticed a small pile of white serving cloths lying beside a storage cabinet. One towel rested slightly apart from the others. She crouched beside it and gently lifted the fabric. Sewn into one corner was the embroidered crest identifying the Western banquet staff. Olivia immediately recognized it. The unfamiliar servant had been working in the eastern section all evening. Palace uniforms were carefully assigned to avoid confusion during important ceremonies. No experienced attendant would accidentally exchange sections in the middle of the busiest banquet of the year. She quietly folded the towel again before placing it exactly where she had found it. A faint scrape echoed deeper inside the corridor. Olivia slowly turned her head. The sound disappeared almost immediately. She remained perfectly still, listening. Silence returned. Instead of continuing forward, she glanced toward a polished copper serving tray hanging upon the wall. Its reflective surface revealed the corridor behind her. A shadow crossed the far entrance for less than a heartbeat before vanishing again. Someone had been watching the hallway. Olivia calmly reached for another empty tray from the shelf, pretending she had entered only to collect serving equipment. Moments later, the unfamiliar servant emerged from another doorway carrying a fresh platter of desserts. He smiled politely as they passed each other. "Busy evening," he remarked pleasantly. "It certainly is," Olivia replied with an equally polite smile. His voice sounded calm, but something about his eyes remained strangely distant. Palace servants often exchanged quick conversations while working together. This man seemed more interested in measuring her reaction than sharing friendly words. As he continued toward the ballroom, Olivia noticed another detail. The embroidered palace crest upon his sleeve had been stitched slightly higher than regulation uniforms. Most guests would never notice. Neither would many servants. Olivia remembered helping repair damaged uniforms countless times over the years. Every official palace tailor placed the crest exactly the same distance below the shoulder seam. This one sat nearly half an inch too high. It was an excellent imitation. It simply was not authentic. She returned to the ballroom, carrying the empty tray she had collected. Music filled the magnificent hall once more, masking the quiet tension building inside her thoughts. The five nobles had subtly adjusted their positions again. Without standing together, they now surrounded the royal platform from different directions, each maintaining comfortable conversation with nearby guests while never losing sight of Alpha King Ethan Blackwood. Ethan himself remained completely unaware of the invisible web tightening around him. He continued greeting visitors with his usual warmth, occasionally smiling at children accompanying respected families and thanking elderly guests for making the long journey to the palace. Olivia admired that kindness, but tonight it also made him vulnerable. Good people often believed others approached them with equally honest intentions. Lord Aldrin stood several feet away speaking with members of the Royal Council. Palace guards remained stationed near every entrance exactly as protocol required. Everything appeared secure. Yet Olivia understood that the greatest weakness inside any carefully protected place was confidence. When everyone believed danger could not exist, they naturally stopped looking for it. Her grandmother had once placed 3 smooth stones upon a table and asked Olivia which one seemed different. She had stared at them for several minutes before finally admitting they looked exactly alike. Her grandmother had simply smiled and turned the middle stone upside down, revealing a tiny silver mark hidden beneath it. The lesson had never been about stones. It had been about patience. Truth often hid beneath ordinary appearances, waiting for someone willing to look twice. Olivia slowly lifted another tray and resumed serving guests as though nothing had changed. Inside, however, her decision had already been made. She would not interrupt the celebration without proof, but she would not leave Ethan Blackwood's side either. If the invisible pattern she had uncovered finally revealed its purpose, she intended to be close enough to stop the next move before anyone else even realized the game had begun. Olivia Hayes continued moving through the crowded ballroom with calm, measured steps, never allowing the concern inside her to disturb the gentle rhythm expected of a palace waitress. Every polished tray she carried became another excuse to remain close to the royal platform without attracting unnecessary attention. Alpha King Ethan Blackwood had just finished greeting a delegation from the eastern provinces and turned toward another group of distinguished guests waiting to offer their respects. Around him, conversations flowed naturally, yet Olivia noticed the invisible pattern tightening once again. One of the 5 nobles slowly lifted his glass before setting it back onto the table without taking a single sip. Another casually adjusted the silver clasp on his formal cloak. Across the ballroom, the unfamiliar servant immediately began walking toward the royal platform with remarkable precision, neither hurried nor hesitant. Olivia felt her heartbeat steady rather than quicken. Her grandmother had always insisted that fear clouded judgment while calm revealed opportunity. She quietly shifted direction, selecting a route that would naturally cross the unfamiliar servant's path. To everyone watching, she appeared to be nothing more than another diligent waitress carrying fresh crystal glasses toward honored guests. The distance between them gradually disappeared. 20 feet. 15. 10. The unfamiliar servant never looked directly at her. His attention remained fixed beyond her shoulder toward Alpha King Ethan Blackwood. Olivia noticed another detail. His left hand supported the serving tray exactly as expected, but the fingers of his right hand remained strangely relaxed beneath the folded serving towel draped over his forearm. It was the posture of someone waiting rather than serving. 5 more steps. The music continued. Laughter echoed beneath the crystal chandeliers. No one else appeared aware that 2 ordinary palace servants were about to cross paths. Olivia reached the intersection beside a marble column at precisely the same moment as the unfamiliar servant. Instead of simply passing, she offered a polite smile and shifted slightly sideways as though attempting to avoid inconveniencing him. "Please forgive me," she said warmly. "Would you mind helping me carry "These glasses to the royal table? Mine are becoming rather heavy." The request sounded completely ordinary. Any experienced palace servant would have answered without hesitation. Instead, the man paused for barely a fraction of a second before replying. "I have already been assigned elsewhere." The answer itself was reasonable. The hesitation was not. Olivia gently nodded as though accepting his explanation. Then, as she adjusted the tray in her hands, she allowed one crystal glass to slide toward the edge. The movement appeared accidental. The unfamiliar servant instinctively reached forward to prevent it from falling. That single motion revealed everything Olivia needed to know. Instead of protecting the glass with the practiced balance of a palace attendant, he reached across his own body in a manner more common among trained guards than professional servants. At the same instant, the folded towel slipped slightly from his arm, exposing the polished handle of a small silver object secured beneath the fabric. Olivia immediately stepped closer, using the same graceful movement her grandmother had taught her countless years ago beside a quiet forest stream. It was never meant to overpower another person. It simply redirected momentum. She gently turned her shoulders, guiding the unfamiliar servant half a step away while allowing the edge of her own tray to brush lightly against his. The contact remained almost invisible to everyone watching. Several crystal glasses tipped sideways. The unfamiliar servant instinctively tried to steady both trays at once. His balance shifted. The folded towel slipped completely free. The small silver object hidden beneath it slid silently onto the polished marble floor before spinning several times under the brilliant chandelier light. Nearby conversations stopped almost immediately. Palace guards instinctively turned toward the unexpected sound. Guests looked down in confusion. The unfamiliar servant froze. Olivia remained perfectly still, lowering her eyes toward the object without speaking a single word. Two royal guards calmly approached and carefully picked up the silver item. Their expressions changed almost instantly. One quietly signaled another guard standing near the royal platform. Alpha King Ethan Blackwood looked toward the gathering with calm curiosity rather than alarm. Lord Aldrin also stepped forward, his experienced eyes moving not only to the object, but to Olivia herself. She still stood exactly where she had been, one hand resting upon the slightly tilted silver tray, her breathing steady, her expression composed. She had not accused anyone. She had not shouted. She had not created panic. She had simply noticed a pattern, trusted her observations, and chosen the smallest possible action at precisely the right moment. Lord Aldrin's attention lingered on the subtle movement she had used only seconds earlier. Something deep within his memory stirred. His eyes narrowed thoughtfully as though he had just witnessed a forgotten page of history come quietly back to life. Across the silent ballroom, Ethan Blackwood looked directly at the young Omega waitress for the first time that evening, not as another invisible servant moving through the palace, but as someone whose quiet courage had just changed the course of an ordinary night into something no one present would ever forget. Silence settled across the grand ballroom with surprising speed. The cheerful conversations that had filled Crystal Moon Palace only moments earlier faded into cautious whispers as every pair of eyes turned toward the young Omega waitress standing beside the tilted silver tray. Olivia Hayes neither stepped backward nor attempted to explain herself. She simply waited, her posture calm, her breathing steady, exactly as her grandmother had taught her whenever uncertainty entered a room. The two royal guards carefully examined the polished silver object recovered from the marble floor before quietly presenting it to Lord Aldrin. The elderly advisor accepted it with practiced composure, studying every engraved detail beneath the warm chandelier light. His thoughtful expression revealed nothing, yet the atmosphere around him grew noticeably more serious. Alpha King Ethan Blackwood slowly approached the gathering without haste. The guests respectfully stepped aside, allowing him to stand only a few feet from Olivia. His attention first settled upon the silver object, then shifted toward the unfamiliar servant, and finally rested upon the young waitress whose quiet actions had drawn everyone's attention. Unlike many rulers who demanded immediate explanations, Ethan spoke with remarkable calm. "You noticed something before anyone else," he said gently. "Tell me what you saw." Olivia lowered her eyes respectfully before answering. "Your Majesty, I did not see one unusual thing. I saw many small things that did not belong together. Ethan listened without interruption. Olivia continued carefully. 5 nobles repeated the same subtle movements throughout the evening. An unfamiliar servant appeared among palace staff, even though no one recognized him. His uniform was almost perfect, but the crest on his sleeve had been sewn differently. His serving towel changed sides after leaving the service corridor. His tray remained almost full, while every other servant continued serving guests. None of those details proved anything by themselves. Together, they formed a pattern that no longer felt accidental. Several members of the royal council quietly exchanged surprised glances. Ethan's expression remained thoughtful rather than skeptical. "And the movement you used?" he asked. "You did not attempt to stop him by force." Olivia gently shook her head. "My grandmother always said that balance solves problems more safely than strength. I only redirected his movement long enough for the truth to reveal itself." Lord Aldrin slowly raised his eyes from the silver object and looked directly at Olivia. There was no suspicion in his expression now, only deep curiosity. "Would you show us exactly what you did?" he asked softly. Olivia hesitated for only a moment before placing her empty tray upon a nearby banquet table. She stepped into an open space beside the marble column where everything had happened only moments before. Without speaking, she recreated the graceful movement exactly as she remembered it. One foot shifted half a step forward. Her shoulders turned gently. One hand guided invisible momentum rather than resisting it. The motion lasted barely 2 seconds. It looked simple, elegant, and almost effortless. Yet when she finished, complete silence filled the ballroom once again. Lord Aldrin did not blink. His eyes widened ever so slightly, as though a memory buried beneath decades of time had suddenly returned. He slowly walked around Olivia, observing her posture from another angle before speaking almost to himself. "Impossible," he whispered. "I have not seen that movement since I was a very young man." Ethan noticed the change in the elderly advisor immediately. "Lord Aldrin," he said quietly, "do you recognize it?" The old advisor answered without taking his eyes from Olivia. "I recognize more than the movement." He looked toward the simple crescent moon pendant resting against the front of her gray uniform. "Young lady," he said gently, "may I ask where you received that necklace?" Olivia instinctively touched the pendant resting over her heart. "It belonged to my grandmother," she replied. "She gave it to me when I was a little girl. She always told me never to remove it." Lord Aldrin slowly approached, stopping only when he could examine the pendant more closely without invading her personal space. The silver crescent reflected the warm candlelight, revealing tiny engraved details that most people would never notice. The elderly advisor drew a slow breath. "Your grandmother," he asked carefully, "did she also teach you that movement?" Olivia nodded. "She never called it anything special. She only said that our family had practiced it for generations because protecting others begins with understanding them, not defeating them." Lord Aldrin gently closed his eyes for a brief moment before opening them again. The quiet certainty upon his face replaced every trace of doubt. He looked toward Alpha King Ethan Blackwood with unmistakable conviction. "Your Majesty," he said calmly, "I believe this young woman carries far more than remarkable observation. If my memory has not failed me, we may be standing before the last living descendant of a family the kingdom believed had disappeared many years ago." A wave of astonished whispers spread through the ballroom as Ethan slowly returned his gaze to Olivia, no longer seeing only an invisible Omega waitress, but someone whose quiet courage, forgotten lessons, and simple crescent moon pendant had just opened the door to a piece of the kingdom's history that everyone else believed had been lost forever. The astonished whispers flowing through the grand ballroom gradually faded as every eye remained fixed upon Olivia Hayes. The young Omega waitress instinctively held the crescent moon pendant resting against her uniform, uncertain why something she had worn since childhood had suddenly become the center of attention. Alpha King Ethan Blackwood quietly studied both Olivia and Lord Aldrin, allowing the silence to settle before speaking. "Explain what you remember," he said calmly. Lord Aldrin nodded respectfully before turning toward the assembled nobles. "Many decades ago, before most of us standing here were born, the Guardian clan stood beside the throne of the Northern Territories. They were never the strongest warriors, nor the wealthiest families. Their purpose was different. They protected the kingdom through observation, wisdom, balance, and the ability to recognize danger before anyone else realized it existed. The elderly advisor gently looked back toward Olivia. Their greatest discipline became known as the Silver Moon Guardian art. It was not created to overpower another person. It was created to redirect conflict before it became tragedy. Only a handful of families ever mastered it, and every one of them disappeared from history after the final Guardian settlements were abandoned. Olivia listened quietly, struggling to connect the extraordinary story with the peaceful memories of her grandmother. She never spoke about any Guardian clan, Olivia said softly. She only told me to pay attention to people instead of judging them, and to remember that patience could reveal more than force. Lord Aldrin smiled with quiet understanding. That is exactly how the Guardians preserved their knowledge. They protected principles first and technique second. Skills can be copied. Character cannot. Ethan slowly stepped closer until he stood only a few feet from Olivia. There was no distance created by rank or title in his expression, only sincere respect. You trusted your own judgment when no one else noticed the danger, he said. You protected this gathering without creating panic, and you chose restraint when many would have acted out of fear. Whatever name history gives your family, those choices belong to you. Olivia lowered her eyes modestly. Your Majesty, I only did what I believed was right. Ethan smiled warmly. That answer tells me even more than your actions. Around the ballroom, many of the nobles who had barely acknowledged the young waitress earlier in the evening now regarded her with thoughtful silence. Some appeared embarrassed by the assumptions they had quietly carried for years. Palace servants exchanged proud smiles among themselves, watching one of their own receive the respect she had never sought. Lord Aldrin gently examined the crescent moon pendant one final time before stepping back. Your grandmother chose silence because she understood that some legacies are safest when carried by humble hands, he said. Tonight, that silence has finally ended. Olivia glanced around the magnificent ballroom that had always felt far beyond her place in the world. The marble columns, crystal chandeliers, royal banners, and elegant guests looked exactly as they had when the evening began, yet everything somehow felt different. She had not become someone new. She was still the same young woman who quietly carried trays, remembered every servant's name, and believed kindness mattered more than recognition. The only difference was that others were finally beginning to see what had always been there. Beyond the towering palace windows, the full moon illuminated the forest surrounding Crystal Moon Palace. Far across the distant hills, a solitary cloaked traveler paused beside an old stone path and looked toward the glowing palace in the distance. Beneath the shadow of the traveler's hood, a faint smile appeared. So the final guardian has found her way home, the traveler whispered before disappearing once more into the moonlit night, leaving only the quiet promise that the forgotten legacy of the Guardian clan had only just begun to awaken. Morning sunlight spilled across the white stone courtyards of Crystal Moon Palace, washing away the tension that had filled the grand ballroom the night before. Palace servants resumed their daily work, yet quiet conversations followed Olivia Hayes wherever she walked. The young Omega still wore the same gray uniform, the same white apron, and the same crescent moon pendant resting against her heart. She carried breakfast trays with the same steady hands that had served the palace for years, refusing every attempt by curious nobles to surround her with unnecessary attention. She believed one extraordinary evening did not erase a lifetime of ordinary work. Even so, the palace itself seemed to treat her differently. Guards greeted her with respectful nods instead of distracted glances. Senior attendants thanked her personally for her dedication. Servants who had once hurried past her now smiled warmly as they crossed the marble corridors. Olivia accepted every gesture with quiet humility, never allowing recognition to change the gentle kindness that had always defined her character. Near midday, a royal messenger approached while she arranged fresh flowers inside the western gallery. His Majesty requests your presence in the moon chamber, the messenger said respectfully. Olivia set the flowers into their crystal vase before following him through familiar hallways that suddenly felt unfamiliar because she had never been invited beyond certain doors. The moon chamber overlooked the forests of the northern territories through towering windows that filled the room with soft natural light. Alpha King Ethan Blackwood stood beside one of those windows, his hands resting comfortably behind his back as he admired the distant mountains. Lord Aldrin waited nearby with several carefully preserved scrolls spread across a large oak table. Ethan turned as Olivia entered and greeted her with the same calm smile she remembered from the banquet. "Thank you for coming," he said. Olivia bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty." Ethan motioned toward the table. "Lord Aldrin spent the entire night searching the royal archives. We found records that may help answer questions about your family." The elderly advisor carefully unrolled one ancient parchment protected beneath a thin sheet of polished glass. Time had faded much of the ink, but one symbol remained perfectly visible. It was a silver crescent embracing the outline of a noble wolf. Olivia instinctively touched the pendant around her neck. The two symbols matched perfectly. Lord Aldrin gently nodded. The Guardians recorded every family entrusted with preserving the Silver Moon Guardian art. According to these archives, one bloodline disappeared before the final census. Their descendants were believed lost. He looked kindly toward Olivia. History was mistaken. Olivia stared quietly at the ancient crest. For the first time, childhood memories returned with unexpected clarity. She remembered her grandmother encouraging her to notice birds changing direction before storms arrived. She remembered balancing smooth stones upon flowing water instead of throwing them. She remembered learning to guide movement without resisting it, believing they were only unusual family games. Every lesson now carried a meaning she had never understood as a child. Ethan watched her thoughtful expression before speaking again. "No one will ask you to become someone you do not wish to be," he said gently. "If you choose to remain a palace waitress, you will always have an honored place here. If you choose to rediscover your family's legacy, this kingdom will help you preserve it." Olivia slowly raised her eyes. "May I choose both?" she asked softly. Ethan's warm smile widened. "That is exactly the answer I hoped to hear." Lord Aldrin quietly laughed with genuine delight. The true guardians never sought greatness by standing above others. They served first and led through example. Outside the chamber windows, a silver wolf appeared briefly at the edge of the forest before disappearing among the towering pines. Neither Ethan nor Lord Aldrin seemed surprised by the quiet visitor. Olivia simply watched the distant trees with peaceful curiosity, unaware that the forgotten path her grandmother had quietly protected for an entire lifetime had now opened before her, inviting not only the last guardian to remember the past, but an entire kingdom too. Rediscover the quiet strength it had almost allowed itself to forget. The days that followed brought subtle changes throughout Crystal Moon Palace, changes that could not be measured by royal decrees or written into official records. They appeared instead in quiet moments that revealed the hearts of ordinary people. Olivia Hayes continued serving meals, arranging banquet tables, and greeting every guest with the same gentle smile she had always carried. She never introduced herself as the descendant of an ancient guardian bloodline. She never corrected those who still called her simply the Omega Waitress. Somehow, that quiet humility earned even greater respect than any title could have provided. One afternoon, while preparing the grand hall for another gathering of clan representatives, Olivia noticed a young kitchen assistant struggling to balance a heavy wooden crate filled with polished silver plates. Without hesitation, she crossed the room and helped steady the load before it slipped from the nervous boy's hands. "Thank you," he whispered with visible relief. "I was afraid everyone would laugh if I dropped them." Olivia smiled kindly. "Everyone needs help sometimes. There is no shame in accepting it." Several nobles entering the hall witnessed the simple exchange. Only a week earlier, most of them would never have noticed a conversation between two palace servants. Now they paused quietly before continuing on their way, thoughtful expressions replacing the indifference that had once been so common. Later that afternoon, Alpha King Ethan Blackwood observed the same moment from the upper gallery overlooking the hall. Lord Aldrin stood beside him with folded hands. "She has not changed," Ethan said softly. "No," Lord Aldrin replied with quiet satisfaction. "That is precisely why the kingdom is beginning to change around her." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. Many rulers spend years writing laws to earn loyalty. Sometimes one humble example accomplishes more than 100 commands. As preparations continued, Olivia carefully adjusted the seating arrangements according to the latest guest list. While moving one carved wooden chair, she noticed a slight crack, beginning to form beneath one of its legs. Most people would never have seen it until the chair eventually failed. She quietly replaced it with another before any guests arrived. Lord Aldrin happened to witness the small action and smiled to himself. Even outside moments of danger, the instincts of the Guardian bloodline revealed themselves through constant attention to details others overlooked. That evening, Ethan invited several respected clan leaders to a modest gathering inside the Moon Chamber. Unlike the grand royal banquet, this meeting focused not on ceremony, but on conversation. When everyone had taken their seats, Ethan surprised the room with a simple request. "Beginning today," he said calmly, "I ask every leader here to spend one day each season working alongside the palace servants, cooks, stable hands, healers, and gardeners." Several nobles exchanged puzzled glances. Ethan continued before anyone could object. "A kingdom cannot remain strong if those who lead forget the people who quietly support them every day. Respect must travel in both directions." No one argued. After witnessing Olivia's courage, many had already begun questioning assumptions they had accepted for years. As the meeting concluded, Ethan stepped into the palace courtyard where evening sunlight painted the white stone walls with soft shades of gold. Olivia happened to be watering a row of moon lilies growing beside the central fountain. She looked up as Ethan approached and offered a respectful bow. "Your Majesty." Ethan gently shook his head with an easy smile. "Today, I came only to thank you." Olivia looked genuinely surprised. "For what?" Ethan glanced across the peaceful courtyard where servants, guards, and nobles now greeted one another with noticeably greater warmth than before. "You reminded this kingdom that true strength is measured by character, not status. You protected more than one evening inside the palace. You helped people see one another differently." Olivia quietly looked toward the blooming moon lilies as a gentle breeze carried their delicate fragrance through the courtyard. She remembered her grandmother's favorite words. "The brightest light is the one that helps others find their way." Standing beneath the evening sky beside the Alpha King, surrounded by a palace slowly learning that lesson for itself, Olivia finally understood that the greatest legacy left by the Guardians had never been hidden techniques or forgotten bloodlines. It had always been the quiet courage to notice those everyone else overlooked and the gentle wisdom to lift them with kindness before the world remembered to do the same. Several weeks later, life inside Crystal Moon Palace had found a peaceful rhythm unlike anything the Northern Territories had experienced in years. The grand halls remained magnificent, the royal ceremonies continued with timeless elegance, and the Guardian clan was still spoken of with wonder. Yet the greatest transformation could not be found in marble walls or royal archives. It lived inside the people themselves. Nobles greeted servants with genuine appreciation. Young apprentices were encouraged to ask questions instead of remaining silent. Palace guards learned the names of the cooks who prepared their meals, while senior officials paused to thank the attendants who quietly kept every celebration running. Small acts of kindness slowly became ordinary, and that ordinary kindness strengthened the kingdom more than fear or pride ever could. Olivia Hayes remained exactly where she had always believed she belonged. She continued serving guests with steady hands, arranging banquet tables with quiet precision, and noticing the tiny details everyone else overlooked. The only difference was that no one overlooked her anymore. People no longer saw an invisible Omega Waitress. They saw a woman whose courage had reminded an entire kingdom that dignity could never be measured by birth, status, or titles. One crisp evening beneath a brilliant full moon, Alpha King Ethan Blackwood invited Olivia to walk through the palace gardens where moon lilies bloomed beside gentle streams. The peaceful silence between them required no ceremony. Ethan finally stopped beside an ancient stone monument engraved with the crest of the Silver Moon Guardian art. "This place has waited many years for someone to remember why it was built," he said quietly. Olivia looked at the weathered carving before smiling softly. Perhaps it was never waiting for one person. Perhaps it was waiting for everyone to remember. Ethan nodded with quiet admiration. "Your grandmother preserved a legacy through humility. You restored it through compassion." Olivia gently touched the crescent moon pendant resting over her heart and lifted her eyes toward the glowing moon above the palace. She realized that destiny had never asked her to become someone extraordinary. It had simply asked her to remain faithful to the kindness, patience, and quiet courage that had guided her every ordinary day. Those simple choices had changed far more lives than she had ever imagined. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, the forests whispered beneath the silver light, and a lone wolf stood upon a distant ridge before lifting its head toward the moon. The sound carried gently across the valleys, not as a warning, but as a promise that hope could always find those who refused to surrender their compassion. And so the forgotten legacy of the Guardians lived on, not through power or glory, but through people who chose to protect others with wisdom, humility, and love. Because true strength is gentle, and love always finds a way to redeem what the world has forgotten. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel so you will not miss more journeys filled with courage, destiny, and hope. Leave a like to support stories that remind us kindness is never weakness. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that quiet people often carry the greatest strength. Finally, tell us in the comments, which moment moved you the most? And do you believe Olivia's greatest gift was her guardian bloodline, or the compassionate heart her grandmother helped her build?